I want you to picture a scenario for a second. It is a nightmare scenario, but stay with me. Someone goes through one of the worst events a human being can experience, a sexual assault.
Right.
That is the trauma. That is the crime. It's horrible. It's immediate, and it changes everything.
That's the primary trauma, the event itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then they survive that. They step out of that moment and back into the world. They might look for help, for justice, or even just for a shoulder to cry on.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of finding safety, they get hit with something else. Something that, according to the stack of research we're looking at today, can actually be just as damaging.
If not more insidious than the assault itself. It's what the literature calls secondary victimization. And honestly, going through these sources, it is startling how pervasive it is. It's just everywhere.
It's huge. And today, we're going deep on this. We've got a source stack that is going to make you look at every interaction differently. We've got a massive, comprehensive study from the International Journal of Advanced Research in Science, Communication, and Technology.
Which is a mouthful.
Which, for the sake of our collective sanity, we're just going to call the IJRSCT.
A good call.
We also have a really practical hands-on guide for partners from Rape Crisis Scotland, and some incredibly detailed medical insights on long-term trauma from UCLA Health.
And I think it's important to state our mission for this deep dive right up front. We aren't just unpacking what happens during an assault. We're unpacking why society fails survivors after the fact.
Yes.
We're going to look at the biology of why we freeze and why we need to stop judging people for it. And we're going to talk about the surprising statute of limitations on healing.
Which, spoiler alert for anyone listening, doesn't exist. But let's start with the disconnect. Because the IJRCT study opened with a statistic that just... it didn't compute for me at first. It completely threw me.
You're talking about the awareness gap.
Yeah. So they surveyed a broad range of people, and a massive 81.5% agreed that secondary victimization have a moderate to very high impact on a person's recovery.
So almost everyone agrees it's a huge problem.
A total disaster for the victim. But, and here's the kicker, 58% of those same people had never even heard the term before.
It's a classic case of recognizing the feeling or the phenomenon, but lacking the language to describe it. We know instinctively that if a survivor is treated badly by the police or, shamed by their family.
Or dismissed by a doctor.
Exactly. We get that it hurts them. On a gut level, we get it, but we don't have a label for it, which means we don't treat it as a systemic issue. We just treat it as isolated incidents.
Oh, that cop was rude. Or that uncle is just insensitive.
Right. We chalk it up to individuals.
But this study is saying, no, this is a phenomenon. It has a shape. So let's define it properly. When we say secondary victimization, what are we actually talking about? Because my first thought, honestly, was, is this about bystanders?
Yeah. Common misconception.
Is this about me feeling bad because I heard about a crime?
No, and that's a good question. It isn't about the observer's feelings. It is specifically about the reaction of the social environment towards the victim. It is the blame, the skepticism, the minimization.
The dismissal.
The dismissal that comes from the very people and institutions supposed to help. The source material actually uses a really visceral phrase for this. They call it the second rape.
Wow. That's incredibly intense. It stops you in your tracks.
It is, and the researchers don't use it lightly. The argument is that while the offender violates the victim's physical body and autonomy, secondary victimization violates their identity, their trust in reality.
It breaks their internal compass.
Precisely. It attacks the psychological self, and the consequences are tangible. The study links this directly to higher rates of PTSD, severe depression, and this terrifying concept called re-victimization.
Okay, let's unpack re-victimization. Because logically, you'd think if someone went through this hell once, they'd be hyper-aware of danger.
Right, you'd think so.
They'd be the most careful people on earth. How does being blamed make you more likely to be attacked again?
It's about the systematic erosion of boundaries. If you tell a survivor that their judgment was wrong, you shouldn't have been there, you shouldn't have trusted him, you drank too much, you are systematically dismantling their trust in their own gut instincts.
You're teaching them that their internal alarm system is broken.
You're essentially gaslighting them into trusting nothing, including themselves. And when you don't trust your own alarm system, you become vulnerable.
You stay in unsafe situations.
You might, because you've been taught that your assessment of unsafe is faulty. The source material highlights that this compounded trauma makes it incredibly difficult to navigate relationships later on. You just don't know where the line is anymore.
That is devastating. And I noticed the IJAR SAT paper didn't just look at the general population. They did a specific literature review on sexual minority men SMM, and the dynamic there seemed even more complicated.
Oh, it adds a whole other layer, a layer of identity weaponization. For sexual minority men, the secondary victimization often attacks who they are, not just what happened.
What do you mean?
The study found a disturbing trend where the assault is attributed to their sexual orientation or their lifestyle.
So it's not just why were you walking down that alley, it's, well, that's the lifestyle you chose, what did you expect?
Exactly that. It frames the violence as an inherent risk of being gay or queer, rather than a crime committed by a perpetrator.
It's like a transactional cost of their identity.
Yes. And just think about the barrier that creates for reporting. If you know that walking into a police station means putting your entire identity on trial, silence becomes the only logical survival strategy.
Which explains why the reporting numbers are so low across the board. The fear of judgment is stronger than the desire for justice.
And that brings us to the institutions themselves. Because it's one thing if a neighbor says something stupid or insensitive, it is an entirely different magnitude of harm when the legal system does it.
Yeah, let's look at the system, because the IJRCT study had some charts on trust that really jumped out at me. They broke down the impact by gender, and the gap was, well, it was a chasm.
The data is stark. They asked respondents about the loss of trust in institutions, law enforcement, healthcare, the courts. For male respondents, only 8% cited this as a major impact.
8%, okay, that's low. And for women?
33%.
Wow. That's, what, 4 times higher?
It forces us to ask a difficult question. Are men and women living in the same legal system? Because the data suggests that, for women, interacting with these institutions is often not a path to resolution.
It's a source of further trauma.
It's a place where they get hurt again.
The expert commentary in the text called this procedural justice.
Yeah. Procedural justice is the idea that the process matters as much as the outcome. Even if you don't get a conviction, and we know convictions are rare, being treated with dignity, with respect.
With transparency.
Yes, that can be healing.
Yeah.
It validates that a wrong occurred. But if the process feels like an interrogation, if it's adversarial, skeptical, then the system itself becomes a perpetrator of that second wound.
It feels like the system is set up to doubt you first and help you second. And honestly, after reading the history section from the UCLA Health Source, I kind of get why it's built that way. I consider myself a history buff, I love looking back at how we got here, but this fact about U.S. law, it absolutely floored me.
You're looking at the marital rape exemption.
Yes. Okay, so I knew historically laws were different. I knew women were treated as property way back when, but the source says that until the 1970s, every single state in the U.S. had an exemption for rape if the perpetrator was a spouse.
It wasn't legally a crime.
It was legally impossible to rape your spouse.
Correct. In the eyes of the law, consent was contractually given at the wedding and could not be revoked. It was a permanent state.
But here's the thing that really got me. Nebraska was the first to get rid of it in 1976. Great job, Nebraska. But do you know when the final state eliminated that exemption?
1993.
1993. I was alive in 1993. I was watching Jurassic Park in theaters in 1993. That is not ancient history. That is yesterday.
It really puts the current cultural issues into perspective, doesn't it? We often ask, why is victim blaming so persistent?
Right. Why do juries hesitate?
Well, legally speaking, until about 30 years ago, society did not view non-consensual sex within a marriage as a crime. That cultural hangover doesn't just disappear because a statute changed in North Carolina in 93.
It lingers in how juries think, how families react.
Yeah.
It really explains the why didn't you just leave questions. Because for a long time, the law literally said you couldn't complain.
And the media plays a huge role in keeping these outdated narratives alive. The IJRCT paper touches on media sensationalism, particularly with children.
Oh, yeah.
The drive for a story often overrides the dignity of the victim. When a child's trauma is packaged as a headline, or worse, true crime entertainment, that's a form of public secondary victimization. It commodifies their pain.
It's like everyone wants a piece of the story, but no one wants to take care of the human being, which I think is the perfect segue to talk about the people who do want to take care of the human being.
The partners, the family, the support system.
Right. We have this booklet from Rape Crisis Scotland for partners of survivors. And reading this, I have to admit, I felt personally called out.
In what way?
Well, they talk about the fixer mentality.
Mm-hmm.
And that is me to a T. If someone I love is hurt, I want to call the police. I want to sue someone. I want to do something.
So you want to fix it.
I want to fix it.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was the right reaction. I thought that was being a good partner.
And it is a very natural human instinct. It comes from love and it comes from anger. But the source emphasizes a critical insight. Sexual violence is fundamentally about the removal of control.
Someone else took power over their body and choices.
Yes. So if I, as the partner, swoop in and say, we are going to the police right now.
I'm doing it again.
In a structural sense, yes. You are inadvertently taking control away again. If a partner pushes for a specific reaction, even a correct legal one, before the survivor is ready, they are replicating that dynamic of powerlessness. You become another person telling them what to do.
That is a tough pill to swallow.
Oh.
Because it feels like helping. It feels like taking charge.
The Rape Crisis Scotland Guide is very clear. Real support means restoring control to the survivor. That might mean they decide not to report.
Or do nothing for 6 months.
Right. It might mean they just sit on the couch. And the partner's job is to support that choice, not to override it with their own need for justice.
The guide had a phrase for this, becoming comfortable with silence.
Which is incredibly hard to do when you're angry.
Speaking of anger and reactions, we need to talk about the fight or flight myth.
Mm-hmm.
Because the guide mentions that a lot of partners struggle with the details. They ask things like, why didn't you kick him? Or why didn't you run?
The why didn't you scream question.
Yeah. And this is where the biology lesson from the source is vital. We all learn fight or flight in school. It's catchy. But the complete model is fight, flight, freeze, and fawn.
And freeze is the one we judge the most.
We view it as giving up.
We do. But the source explains that freezing is just as much a biological imperative as fighting. It is an automatic survival response, not a conscious choice.
So it's not a decision.
Not at all. When the amygdala detects a threat that is overwhelming, it can flood the body with chemicals that literally immobilize you. It's an evolutionary mechanism to play dead so the predator loses interest.
So asking why didn't you fight is basically asking why did your autonomic nervous system do its job?
Exactly. And shaming someone for freezing is shaming them for surviving. The guide mentions that partners often struggle with this because they want to believe they would have fought. But the reality of trauma is that the brain takes over. You don't get a vote.
That's a really important distinction. It's not cowardice, it's biology. Now, the Scotland source also brought up something called vicarious trauma. I'd heard of this for therapists, but not really for partners.
It's crucial. It refers to the shock, the anger, the guilt that partners feel when hearing the details. The source warns that hearing these things can actually cause trauma symptoms in the listener nightmares, anxiety.
Intrusive thoughts.
Yeah, so the partner needs support too.
It's the classic oxygen mask analogy.
It is. If the partner falls apart or becomes so consumed by their own rage that they can't function, they can't hold space for the survivor, the guide explicitly says partners need to set boundaries.
So it's okay to say, I can't hear any more details right now.
Yes, because I want to be strong for you and I'm starting to crumble.
That feels counterintuitive, telling a survivor to stop talking.
Yeah.
But I see the logic. You can't pour from an empty cup.
And you certainly can't help someone heal if you're drowning in your own anger. And we need to be realistic about that healing process. It's a long road.
Yeah, let's pivot to the UCLA health insights on the long-term effects. Because I think there's a Hollywood version of therapy where you go for a few sessions and then you're fixed. But the source says trauma can lodge in the brain and body for decades.
Decades. The UCLA specialist, Jane Willens, notes that she treats women who were assaulted recently and those assaulted 40 years ago. And the symptoms aren't just emotional, they're physical.
Like what are we talking about here?
Chronic headaches, dizziness, unexplainable body aches, gastrointestinal issues, fatigue.
That's wild. So it's not just, I feel sad, it's my physical body is hurting because of something that happened 20 years ago.
It is neurobiological. The body keeps the score. If that trauma energy isn't processed, it manifests physically. And this brings us to a demographic that is almost entirely invisible in this conversation.
The elderly.
We usually picture young people when we talk about sexual assault. college campuses, nightclubs.
Right. But the UCLA report had a section on the elderly that was absolutely heartbreaking.
This was the hardest part of the research for me. It really shook me. The statistics paint a brutal picture. We know 1 in 3 women has experienced sexual violence in her lifetime.
So that means many women in their 70s, 80s, and 90s are carrying this silent burden.
Exactly. But the UCLA data on current reporting for the elderly is shocking. Only 30% of people over 65 report abuse.
Why is that number so low? Is it just generational shame?
That's part of it, but look at who the perpetrators are. The source states that 80% of the time, the perpetrator of elder sexual abuse is a caregiver.
80%?
Yes. Someone they rely on for food, for medicine, for getting out of bed. The power dynamic is incredibly skewed, and often these victims have cognitive decline or dementia.
Oh, God. So if they act out or withdraw, no one thinks assault.
Exactly. The source mentions signs like bruising, which are obvious, but also social withdrawal. If someone with dementia withdraws, it's often written off as just the disease progressing. It's the ultimate trap.
You're dependent on the person hurting you.
And your brain might not even allow you to articulate what is happening.
That is chilling. It really shows how vulnerability changes shape over a lifetime, but the risk remains.
It does. But I don't want to leave us in that dark place. Because the UCLA expert emphasized something very important. A message of neuroplasticity.
I like that part. It felt like a lifeline.
It is rooted in science. The brain is plastic. It can change. Even decades after an event, the brain can learn adaptive coping tools. A survivor in their 70s can still regain personal power and control.
The trauma isn't permanent concrete.
It's not. Treatment works. It is never too late to start that work. The brain is resilient if given the right tools.
That's a really important note to hit, because otherwise, this data can feel overwhelming.
It is overwhelming, but understanding it is the first step to dismantling it.
So let's try to wrap our heads around all this. We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have. We started with the definition that secondary victimization is the second wound caused by the reaction of the world.
And it can be just as damaging as the crime itself. We saw that the institutions are failing women specifically, with that massive 33% loss of trust compared to 8% for men.
And we learned that the legal history of this country, that marital rape exemption existing until 1993, still haunts how we view victims today.
We also unpacked the personal side, that freezing is biology, not cowardice.
And that for partners, the goal isn't to fix the situation, but to restore control to the survivor, even if that means just sitting in silence.
And finally, we saw that this follows people into old age, often silently, but that the brain is capable of healing at any stage.
And if we connect this all back to you, the listener, statistically, you know a survivor.
Yeah. With the numbers we're seeing, 1 in 3 women, and high rates for men too, you absolutely know someone, even if they haven't told you.
And that is why this matters, because understanding that the freeze response is automatic or that the desire for control is paramount, it changes how you show up for people.
It changes you from being a potential source of secondary victimization into a source of support.
Exactly.
It really does. You know, I'm still thinking about that first stat we opened with. 58% of people don't know what this term means.
Yeah.
But 81% agree the impact is real.
It suggests our intuition about trauma is often wrong. We think we know how to help call the cops, fight back, but those common sense reactions are actually part of the problem.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy question to chew on. If the majority of us agree that the aftermath destroys people, but we keep repeating the same behaviors, does that mean our default settings for empathy are broken?
I think it raises an even more provocative question. What if we stopped asking what happened, which is an investigative question, a curiosity question,
Right.
and started asking, what do you need right now, which is a support question? How much faster would that healing process actually be?
What do you need right now? I think that's a question we could all afford to ask a little more often in every part of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Thank you. It's a heavy topic, but an important one.
Take care of each other out there. We'll catch you on the next one.